Great. So we'll get started. Again, my name is John Grubb. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. I have the honor of being the Chief Operating Officer at the Bay Area Council. For those of you that are on this webinar right now, you are some very lucky people. There are those that either didn't have the opportunity to be here or chose not to be here. They made a mistake or they are missing out on a big opportunity. We do this poll, and I'll let Jessica in a second when I introduce her tell you a little bit more about how we do it. But we've been doing this poll of Bay Area residents or Bay Area voters since 1980. And I've been working with EMC in the recent years. And in all of my years of doing this poll, this is by far the most interesting poll that we've done of Bay Area residents. So a lot of the critical questions of our time are about to be revealed to you. And so I'm really excited to be able to share it with you. One of the challenges that we're going to have is that we're going to go through a whole bunch of poll results on different topics, and then we're going to do the Q&A with you. And so, you can write in questions into the Q&A box, either as Jessica is speaking or sort of wait till we get to the end section and do that. But you're going to have to remember your questions for that time. Anyway, without any further ado, let's dig into these survey results. So first, I'm going to introduce Jessica Polsky-Sanchez. I knew Jessica Polsky when she was just Jessica Polsky. She's a really smart person because she has so much knowledge in the data banks of EMC research. So EMC research is the preeminent polling firm in the Bay Area. I think they would say in California and nationally, but I'm only going to vouch for the Bay Area. And she's one of the leaders of the firm who helps put together this poll every year. And, we all make these mistakes about assumptions, about what you think, but Jessica's someone who knows. She actually knows so many answers to so many questions on anything that you could think of because they have all of this data there. So we're going to start to dig into it. One of my erroneous assumptions, as a teaser, was about school reopenings. And I remember being in a conversation with her early on that I thought everybody wanted schools to get open as quickly as possible. I was wrong, and she let me know that. So when she speaks, she knows what she's talking about. And so without any further ado, let's bring in Jessica and we can get going on the poll. And I do want to ask Jessica, in the wake of the presidential elections, just as a quick tee off, there's a lot of quibbles or doubt about the authenticity or effectiveness of polling. And I think we have some advantages in California and in the Bay Area, about how we do these polls that might be more effective than in other places. And so if you could also just highlight who did we talk to and how we did it in the beginning, that would be great. But with that, Jessica, please take us away.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So give me 1 minute here. Okay, thank you so much for having me here to share these results of the Bay Area Council poll from 2021. As mentioned, this is a cool poll that asks about a lot of different topic areas. That's one of the most fun things about it. So to answer some of those questions about how we did this research, I'm going to go over a few points on the methodology, and then I will go into some detailed results. This is a survey of 1,000 registered voters in the 9-county Bay Area. So the demographics and the geography match those of registered voters in the 9-county Bay Area, including on variables like age, gender, and ethnicity. We did conduct this research back in March, and in a year like this one, when opinions are somewhat volatile and our environment is a dynamic one, we do have to keep in mind the context in which these questions were asked. This is a scientific survey where a random selection of voters were invited to complete the survey online by either email or text message. So that enables us to get a random and representative sample of voters. The survey was also made available in multiple languages. And as mentioned, we've been doing this poll for a number of years. You'll see some trend data over the course of those years, going back to 2014. And as I mentioned, we are seeing a lot of results that we think are interesting in light of the current pandemic, and we always want to keep that context in mind when interpreting these results. So a few notes on the overall issue environment and the mood of these respondents in the Bay Area. We've been asking this kind of warm-up question over the years. Do you feel things in the Bay Area are going in the right direction, or do you feel things have gotten pretty seriously off on the wrong track? So you can see that back in 2014, we had a majority, 57%, who said things were going in the right direction and only 27% saying things were off on the wrong track. As the years went by, in 2016, we started to see optimism decline. In 2018, quite substantial decline in optimism, and pessimism went up, and we've seen it, pessimism has been holding strong at that 50% or over trend line in the red, with 50% now saying things are on the wrong track and 26% saying things are headed in the right direction. We ask an open-ended question in this survey: what is the most important problem facing the Bay Area today? So what we're able to capture with this question are kind of the leading top-of-mind concerns facing our region. And we get a number of different kinds of responses, and we put them into categories, and these are the top mentioned categories. 27% mentioned something specifically about homelessness. 26% mentioned something about housing or housing costs or the cost of living. 16% this year mentioned coronavirus or COVID-19, and 9% mentioned something about crime and safety. So again, these are leading top of mind concerns facing the Bay Area. And when we look back over time at what these leading top of mind concerns have been, it's interesting to see how they've fluctuated. So the top line, the housing numbers in green, those were at their peak in 2018, 2019, when 34% mentioned housing. We have been seeing that gray trend line, the mention of homelessness, has been going up pretty substantially over the years. It went up from 13% in 2019 to 24% in 2020 and 24% this year. So again, the most frequent top of mind concern for our area, homelessness. And we did start asking about coronavirus or hearing about coronavirus back in 2020, because that poll was done at the very beginning of the pandemic in March of last year. So on this slide, you can see what we heard from Bay Area voters when we asked about a series of different issues facing the Bay Area specifically. So rather than an open-ended question like you saw on the previous slides, these are specific questions, and we asked, how concerned are you with each of the following in the Bay Area on a scale from 1 to 7? 1 is not at all concerned and 7 is extremely concerned. So what rises to the top here again is homelessness. So you can see on that 1 to 7 scale, 6.2 as an average level of concern. It's pretty overwhelming. Also rising to the top, wildfires, housing, the economy, income inequality, climate change, and then you can get to COVID-19 toward the middle of this chart, and so on as you move on down. So we've heard about some of the challenges people think the Bay Area is facing. We asked this question, even with its challenges, the Bay Area is still the best place on earth to live. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? And we've been asking that going back to 2019, when we heard about 57% agree with that statement. It went down just a hair to 55% in 2020 and 53% this year. So just over half of Bay Area voters saying this is the best place on earth to live. We hear a lot about people saying they're going to move away from the area. So we've been asking this question over time. Do you agree or disagree? I am likely to move out of the Bay Area in the next few years. And you can see here the numbers have fluctuated just a bit as we've been asking this question, with 47% total who agree with that statement this year, 22% who strongly agree. So whether they follow through on this or not, we don't know, but we do see a solid portion here indicating they intend to move away from the Bay Area in the next few years. Why leave the Bay Area? We follow up with those who say they at least somewhat agree they're going to move. With that question, and this is an open-ended question that we've put into these different categories of responses. 36% mentioning something about the cost of living being the motivator for moving. Housing issues mentioned by another 24%. Things about policy or the economy mentioned by 1/3. Quality of life issues mentioned by 1/4. Basic life changes and family issues also mentioned by some as reasons to leave. Where are they going? We also asked where do they think they're going to move, since they indicated they might move in the next few years. And here is what we heard. Again, this is only out of those respondents who indicate they are likely to move, not out of everybody. But some of the typical places you might hear people say they're going to go, like the Southwest, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, the Pacific Northwest, somewhere else within the state of California. We heard some people saying, I don't know, somewhere else out of state, somewhere just more affordable. So a variety of different places mentioned here.
And Jessica, I just wanted to flag here, if I jump in, I'll try not to jump in a bunch, but she gave me permission before we started to do this. One thing I found interesting here is that the big narrative, so the first narrative was there's an exodus. Then the second one is, no, people are just moving from the city to like the suburbs. But if you look here, actually, those that want to leave where they most want to go, it actually is out of California. So it's about, I guess, 88%, if I'm reading this right, that want to move out of the state. So anyway, it's just something to consider. What their actual behavior is later on, what they actually do might be different than what they say, but it is something to note here.
Yeah, that's worthwhile noting. And it's 88% among those who say they're going to move, so a much smaller portion overall. And, I think this is also interesting because the question is about moving out of the Bay Area rather than, just moving in general. So we want to keep that in mind. Okay, something that's on a lot of our minds these days, all the impacts of COVID-19 and this pandemic we've been living through for just over a year now. You saw earlier on a general result on this question, but here the full set of results when we ask, how concerned are you about COVID-19 or coronavirus in the Bay Area? You can see people are concerned. The majority are concerned here. You do have some people who just are not at all concerned, rating that as a 1 on that 1 to 7 scale. So a variety of different opinions, but overall, some decent level of concern about COVID-19. What about silver linings? Has there been anything good coming out of this pandemic? We did ask this open-ended question, if there is has been a silver lining or a good part about the pandemic for you, what was it? And so here are the things we heard. Most often mentioned, being able to spend time with family or friends. Also people mentioning the opportunity to work at home or even having new job opportunities, less commuting, more time for themselves, time for their hobbies, to slow down, save money, all the kinds of things that you might imagine are some of the benefits of this year we've spent sheltering in place to a certain extent. But interesting to note that 29%, the plurality here, mentioned that there was no silver lining. There isn't something that they can come up with as something good that came out of this pandemic. We also asked another open-ended question, what, if anything, has been especially challenging for you and your family over the past few months? A lot of different things mentioned here. Not surprising to see that being isolated, being in lockdown is one of the most frequently mentioned things here. The job market, the economy mentioned by 13%, public health issues mentioned by many, school closures, housing issues, cost of living, some of the things that you heard earlier, some of the issues facing the region come up with this question as well. So how about when people think things will go back to normal? So we said none of us can see into the future, but based on your best guess, when do you feel like you will feel safe returning to quote unquote normal? And here's what we heard. We have a variety of different amounts of time that people think are the timeline for that return to normal. 11% say now, we should return to normal right now. I feel perfectly fine with that. We had 19% who said within the next 6 months, 32% within 6 months to a year, 22% 1 to 2 years, and then smaller portions even looking farther out than 2 years ahead. So not seeing things return to normal in the near future at all. And 6% say things will never return to normal. How safe are people feeling about some of the activities, some of these everyday social activities that we might engage in? So we asked, do you think that each of these is very safe, somewhat unsafe, or very unsafe? And so you can see where people were at the time of the research. Dining outside at a restaurant. We did see 75% when it comes to dining outside, considered that safe, 25% still considering it unsafe. How about dining inside at a restaurant? Well, it's kind of reversed. 63% considered that unsafe and only 37% safe. Attending a professional sporting event, the solid majority, 70%, seeing that as unsafe, and attending indoor gatherings of 100 or more people, the vast majority, 78%, acknowledging that that's not safe. Here's the question that John mentioned at the top. How safe do you think going to school is right now? And you can see opinions fairly divided. 53% saying going to school is safe, 47% saying going to school is not safe. Among those with a child under 18 at home, 55% at the time said going to school is safe, 45% unsafe, and those without children, not terribly different here. Since the time that we conducted the survey and today, a lot of schools have gone back to in-person learning, at least in hybrid, a lot more than at the time of the survey. So these opinions may be changing a little bit, but we are still seeing a good number of even those with children saying that going to school is not safe. How about transit and travel? How many people think traveling on a plane is safe right now? Well, 42% say it was safe, 58% said it's not safe. And taking public transit, we had a good portion, 64% saying that taking public transit is not safe, only 35% perceiving that activity as safe. How safe do you think working in an office is right now? So looking at the overall result, which is toward the middle of this slide, you can see 49% perceived that as safe, 51% unsafe. So very divided opinions about going into the office. And then looking at how this breaks down by some demographic groups, including those working in different kinds of industries, as well as those who are either working from home sometimes, all the time, always working from home, or not working. So it's kind of interesting to see that those who are at least sometimes working outside of the home are more likely to say that doing so is safe, or working in an office is safe, 64% among those who are at least sometimes working outside the home, perceiving this as safe. Speaking of working from home, we asked a couple questions about that. To what extent are you working from home? And when do you expect that you'll start going to a workplace? And here's what we heard. 32% are never working from home, so they're already working at a work site. 19% working from home sometimes, 14% always working from home. Among, and this portion is the portion that's always working from home and expects to return to work within 6 months. We have 18% who are working from home right now, but expect to return in more than 6 months, and 12% who say they're permanently working from home, interestingly. And some more information along those lines. We asked people both before and after the pandemic, the number of days that they were going into a workplace and what they anticipate for after the pandemic. So really trying to understand here if behaviors when it comes to going into work are likely to change based on what people anticipate not necessarily what they will end up doing, because we can't know the future at this point. But it's really interesting here to see 10% of respondents saying that they already were going in 0 days per week before the pandemic, but that number goes up to 16% for what people anticipate doing after the pandemic. So a good portion there moving from working remotely always before the pandemic to after the pandemic. And interestingly, when you look at the percentage who reported that they went into a workplace 5 days a week before the pandemic, that's 58% of those who are employed. It goes down to 38% in terms of what they anticipate doing after the pandemic. So a good portion of those who are going in for the 5-day work week anticipate not going in that often once the pandemic is over. And it's interesting, we took a look from the American Community Survey back in 2018 at the share of residents in the Bay Area who reported primarily working from home. That was 6.4% in 2018. Do note that that's residents compared to voters, which is what we have in our data set, but it's interesting that it's pretty close to the 10% in this research who reported that they worked from home before the pandemic. Now, when we took those numbers and we looked at what percentage basically report to us that they anticipate going into a workplace less often after the pandemic is over than before, we calculated that number, and it's 34% of all working respondents. So that's a pretty good portion, a third saying that they plan to go into the office less often after the pandemic than they did before the pandemic. And the numbers are different depending on which industry they work in. You can see here with most of these numbers sort of being close to that 1/3 mark, with the exception of those in professional services or tech, where 53% who are employed in professional services or tech anticipate that they will go into the office less often after the pandemic than they did before. Interesting also to look at how these numbers break down by income level as well as education level. There is a clear linear relationship between income and the likelihood that they will go into the office less often after the pandemic, with higher income, of course, being more likely to say, I'm going to go into the office less often after the pandemic. And the same pattern exists for education level, with higher education levels saying they're going to go into the office less often after the pandemic than before.
And Jessica, can I just, I want to put, if this isn't obvious, we should put a pin in this slide here and just think about this. This is pretty sweeping ramifications in terms of what remote work could mean on an equity basis. Who is still going to be commuting to work to the office and who might not. The other piece, if these numbers are right, where it was 6.4%, and then let's say it shifts to 16%, are always working from home going forward, I think according to the numbers that I've seen, that would mean about 256,000 less people every day commuting to work, whether they're driving or taking public transit. So 256,000 people is a lot less people on the road. Now we got a lot of people on the road or tracks or ferry boat or whatever it is, but still that could be a big change for us going forward.
So still speaking about working from home, we wanted to see how people judged their own productivity in doing so. So we asked, how would you rate your productivity working at home? This is among those who are employed and also working from home always or sometimes, of course. So looking at those people, it's interesting that just above half say that they're actually more productive, 28% much more productive working from home than going into a workplace. Although 28% do acknowledge they're less productive and 20% say about the same. So moving on to some questions about some other topics, starting with transportation. This is a question that we have been asking over the years in the Bay Area Council poll, thinking about transportation in the Bay Area compared to a year ago. Is it easier to get around, harder to get around, or about the same? So the easier numbers in blue, the harder numbers in red, and then the same in gray. We hadn't seen a lot of fluctuation over the years when it came to the percentage saying that it has gotten easier to get around. Certainly traffic has been a major issue. So the numbers were quite low over the years until this year. It went from, in 2020, 11% saying over the last year it has gotten easier to get around, to now 27% saying over the last year it's gotten easier to get around. Certainly the pandemic bringing work life somewhat to a halt and people stopped commuting, that has no doubt contributed to these numbers here. And you can see the percentage reporting that it has gotten harder to get around, going from 47% last year to only 23% this year. We've also asked these questions over the years. Which modes of transportation do you use at least 2 to 3 times per week for any purpose? And it's interesting to see how the numbers have changed, especially in the last couple of years. Again, I'll note the 2021 numbers in the blue and then the 2020 numbers in the dark green. Those, again, we took those numbers right at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So at that time, we were already seeing some shifts. But whereas 77% and a consistent 3/4 or more have said over the years that they drive alone as their one of their primary modes of transportation, the numbers have changed in contrast for many of these other modes. Walking has declined. It declined in 2020 to 29% from in the 40s in earlier years, and then went down to 23% this year. Carpooling has gone down, biking has gone down, rideshare went from 15% in 2019 to 10% at the beginning of the pandemic to 4% this year.
And we should note, Jessica, I hope it doesn't seem like I'm interrupting too much,
Not at all.
that the 2020 numbers were actually conducted when the pandemic had, the shutdown order was just halfway through our polling, it had been implemented. So that may impact the 2020 numbers less than the others in the trend lines here.
Absolutely. We like to think of, and you'll see in one slide from this one, we think of the 2019 as the pre-pandemic number when it comes to these transportation questions, whereas the 2020 was the beginning of the pandemic. And then we hope that the 2021 numbers represent the end of the pandemic. We shall see. So these are the modes of transportation when it comes to transit. The proportion reporting that they took a bus or light rail went down a little bit initially in 2020 to 12%. It is down to 6% in this poll. BART ridership went down from 16% in 2019 to 10% in 2020, and it's now at 6%. So pretty dramatic drop in BART ridership according to these results, and also some drops in train, shuttle buses, and ferry usage. So when we put all of this information together, as I mentioned, we're thinking of those 2019 poll numbers as kind of the pre-pandemic numbers, the pre-pandemic baseline. And then in this poll, we asked, of course, which modes of transportation do you use 2 to 3 times per week? And then we also asked, do you anticipate after the pandemic, once it's safe, which modes of transportation do you anticipate using 2 to 3 times per week? And here you can see the comparison with 2019 in purple, current numbers in light blue, expected after pandemic numbers in dark blue. So it's interesting to see when it comes to driving alone, we don't see an increase from what they're doing today to after the pandemic. Whereas when it comes to using public transit, all those different forms of public transit, although we don't see a recovery to the 29% that reported using them before the pandemic, we do see an increase from the 12% reporting that they use it today to 20% anticipated for the future. Shifting to another interesting topic, we asked a couple questions to understand how people might feel about combining BART and Caltrain into one integrated system. As you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, the vast majority, 83%, like that idea. 38% strongly support it, 44% somewhat support it, and only 14% in total oppose that idea, absent any other description or information about such a policy. Then on the right-hand side of the slide, we did describe some of the potential benefits to see how that might impact support. Some people say that combining BART and Caltrain into one integrated system would provide more efficient, convenient, and better service and allow continuous rail around the bay. Given what you've read, would you support or oppose integrating BART and Caltrain into one system? Support just goes up a little bit to 86%, but it's hard to get much higher when you start at numbers like that, and only 12% oppose with that information. So again, not a lot of detail about how this policy would work, but certainly initial positive reactions to that idea. And when we look at the support numbers by some demographics here, you can see how people feel who are current BART or Caltrain users. They especially like this idea, 91% total support with them. And then you can see there's a little bit of difference based on which county we're looking at, with strong support in Alameda County in particular, but still widespread support regardless of where we're talking about in the Bay Area. So moving on to a few questions about housing. Similar to the question you saw that we ask about transportation, we also ask when it comes to housing in the Bay Area, compared to a year ago, is it easier to find, harder to find, or about the same? And you can see the numbers that while they'd fluctuated a little bit over the years, not dramatically until this year, where we see the number saying that over the last year it has gotten harder, dropped from 64% to 42%, and the number saying that it has gotten easier to find housing, going from only 3% in 2020 to 13% this year. So some pretty significant changes in the midst of this pandemic. Also asking this question over time about how people feel about building new housing in transit and commercial areas. Do they agree or disagree that they support policies that make it easier to build new housing in transit and commercial areas? We were seeing the total percentage support go up over the years. It hit 78% in 2019 and stayed there in 2020. It's down a little bit to 71% total support this year. And how about building new housing in their neighborhood? Do they agree or disagree? I support the building of new housing in my neighborhood. We had also seen these numbers go up to well over half who agreed that they support building new housing in their neighborhood, understanding the need to do that given the cost of living and the cost of housing in our area. The percentages who do support new housing in their neighborhood have dropped a bit this year compared to the last 2 years. Interestingly, a lot of the drop in support is coming from more urban counties, Alameda and San Francisco counties. We've also been tracking this question over the years. We think it's interesting and informative. We haven't seen a lot of fluctuation in the results, not surprisingly. Approximately what percentage of your household income do you spend on housing, with a good portion reporting that they spend a quarter to one half or even more than half of their household income on housing over time. It has been pretty consistent despite a little bit of fluctuation in those numbers. When we break this apart, to look at renters versus homeowners, we see that renters are reporting that they spend substantially more of their household incomes on housing than those who are homeowners. And that has been consistent over the years. So moving on to a few notes on the overall business climate and the economy, starting with some economic readings here. These are questions we've been asking since 2014. How do you think the Bay Area economy is doing today compared to 6 months ago? You can see that percentage saying they thought it was doing better had been on the decline since 2014, hitting a low point in 2020 at 13% saying they thought the economy was doing better than 6 months ago. That was at the very beginning of the pandemic. The number has bounced back to 31% who think that the economy is better than 6 months ago, but 40% still saying they think it's doing worse, some pandemic impact in that response we think. But when it comes to looking at the next 6 months, how do you think the economy will be doing 6 months from now? You see quite a bit of optimism, with over half, 52%, saying they think it will be better in the next 6 months, and only 19% think it'll be worse. So we do see people expecting quite a rebound. A set of questions about how people think some of these local issues are affecting our local economy. So thinking about the future of the Bay Area's economy, how concerned are you about each of the following? Housing costs. 70% are very concerned, and 21%, so almost universally here we see local voters are concerned about housing costs and their impact on the future of the Bay Area's economy. Local companies not growing, 80% here are concerned about local companies not growing. The amount of local taxes that local businesses pay, 3/4 are concerned. The amount of state business taxes that local businesses pay, you do see the vast majority concerned. The amount of regulations on local business, also quite a bit of concern, along with companies moving out of the Bay Area and other states recruiting local companies to move. So certainly an acknowledgement that some of these things make the business environment challenging in the Bay Area. And I will leave you on this final note, final slide here, a couple of questions kind of on the fun side. Which do you think is a better place to have a business and to live? It's interesting, California wins out with this set of voters on both these counts, but much more so as a place to live, where 73% say California is a better place to live than Texas. Only 51% say California is a better place to have a business. 46% say Texas is a better place to have a business. So kind of fun when you think about how the media talks about this issue as well. So with that, happy to answer any other follow-up questions or have a discussion.
So thanks, Jessica. Great job. There are a bunch of questions. I'm going to do my best to get through them. So the first two are from J.R. Starrett and Cynthia Murray, which are about those that are thinking of leaving or saying that they would like to leave. And so there's just a question about the demographics. I mean, JR was asking specifically how many of them are recent transplants. So, could we do a crosstab of how long have you lived in the Bay Area and see if there's a trend in, recently moved here, also willing to leave. And I would just add, is there, and Cynthia asked us too, is there an age spectrum that we notice on that? And also, I noted political views or feelings about, taxes seemed to be impactful. But what did you see in the results that way? And Mallory is here too, Jessica's able colleague, to help answer those questions if she can as well.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say we do have those variables, and we have crosstabs by how long they've lived in the Bay Area, by age, and other demographics. So we can certainly take a look on specific questions.
Okay, and anything that you remember about that, or Mallory could shine a light on?
Yeah, I can say a little bit on that. So on the first question on if we tracked if people were recent transplants, we did ask how long people have lived in the Bay Area. Kind of lowest data point there is less than 2 years. So we really only know if they've lived there within or moved there within 2 years. And among the entire survey population, that's 4% have lived in the Bay Area for less than 2 years. And among those who say that they're likely to move, it's 3%. So it's really about the same there. So we can't really make any big claims about recent transplants for that question. And then, sorry, I'm looking at my other screen over here, but for the second question about demographics, about those who are thinking of leaving, they are slightly younger. There's a bigger percentage who are under 50. As John mentioned, kind of ideologically, attitudinally, they are a little bit less likely to be Democrats, so more independents and Republicans, probably relating some to the thoughts on the business climate, which we can certainly look into those in more depth. And then beyond that, there wasn't a significant ethnicity difference, and then those who are planning to leave are slightly more likely to be renters and slightly lower educated. So that might tie into, I think Cynthia mentioned, kind of the younger workforce. And so those are just kind of some highlights. We can certainly look into that in more depth and send any follow-up if needed.
Great. Okay, so Jeffrey Douglas asked, are you aware of public transit agencies talking about how potential shifts in modes of travel and remote work, I think, will be in the future and how they respond to it? There's an additional question about shifts away from investment in public transit. And Jessica, we're working on this, aren't we, together? So we are working with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission on behalf of the transit agencies to dig into this very deeply. They're very invested in trying to figure out this answer and be able to time their service and figure out how to do it the right way and sort of what will move people to get back on. We also at the Bay Area Council are surveying our members, again, in partnership with EMC and the broader business community to understand return to work plans so that we can start to figure out how you ramp up service, where, which agencies, all the different vagaries or dials that you need to turn to be able to do that. I don't know, Jessica, if you have anything to add on that.
No, I mean, indeed, this is a top of mind issue right now and very much something that we're looking into. It's hard to, see exactly what the future holds. But, I think another thing to emphasize is how much opinions are changing on this every day as we get, as things change in this pandemic. So it's a dynamic environment.
Yeah, so there are a couple questions here about return to work, and do we have any data on whether respondents have been told by their employers how their work from home versus work at office will change, which I don't think was something we asked in this poll, but we are digging into in our other research efforts, which I'm sorry to tease that way, but not share with you. Unless, did I miss that, Jessica, or did we?
No, you're correct. We did not ask about that specifically.
And then Yuki Ishibashi asks, do you think 38% on 5 days of the office is high or small? What do you think about it? And maybe Jessica, could you add, I don't know if you've done this kind of survey in other parts of California or other parts of the country and how that might compare.
I don't have that information from other parts of the country or for other clients at my fingertips. I suspect, the average number of days people anticipate going into the office, although the change might seem a little bit small when we look at it very specifically from the survey, it's actually quite significant. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that this is not, we're not in the future yet, and what people think they might do today might not actually come to pass. So there's still a big question mark as to how people's change in behavior when it comes to going into the workplace is going to impact our economy and all the associated variables. I think the change from 58% who said that they went in 5 days a week to 38% anticipated after is substantial if that comes to pass. I don't know how else to describe it. It's gonna make a big impact.
So Casey Beyer, who I believe works with the Santa Cruz Chamber of Commerce, if I have that right, asks you, while the poll is specific to the 9 Bay Area counties, do you think the trends translate to the surrounding counties? So Central Coast, Sacramento area, et cetera. So I'm sure you've done polling in those areas too. Is the Bay Area a unique beast in our 9 counties, or are there similarities to those places?
Good question. I don't think I can answer that question because we haven't asked the exact same questions elsewhere. So I don't want to necessarily speculate. I do think the Bay Area is fairly unique, as we all know, in quite a few ways.
Thanks. This is the thing with Jessica. She only answers when she has the exact answer, which is a great thing. So, so Jim Hartnett asks, on the BART Caltrain, oh, sorry, the things are moving around. Question: there's a great difference between integrating schedules versus a merger of agencies. On the, for the 2 agencies themselves. And the question is, in this survey or maybe any other surveys that you've seen, do you see a difference? Is it about the merging of them, or is it more about the experience for the rider, or are those the same thing in any polling that we've done?
I'm not sure I understand. Do you mind restating the
Well,
question?
so have we ever asked, are voters looking for the two agencies to merge?
On the
And
BART
that's what
Caltrain.
they really want, which would be a challenging thing, but could be done. It's been done. Or is it more about the experience that it's one ride, one seat, and they're able to have a easy experience that way? Has that been tested? Was that
Yeah.
tested in our survey or tested otherwise at your way?
So I don't want to speak without having the data in front of me on that issue. I do suspect that it's all of the above when it comes to the kinds of things that made people respond so positively to that idea. I think the fact that we're seeing a positive response to it, regardless of which part of the Bay Area we're talking about, even people in the North Bay counties that might not have direct access to BART or Caltrain, like this idea. It's really just kind of a, oh, that sounds good. Let's consolidate. So I don't know if we can really speculate as to what's playing into the receptiveness to that idea based on these survey results.
Okay, and then Gwen Litvak, who is an incredible human being that works at the Bay Area Council, has written that if you're a company and you would like to participate in the return to transit survey that we're doing, this is where you would say what your company's doing in terms of bringing, having already brought employees back or going to bring them back, how are you doing, all of that sort of stuff. To email her, it's glitvak at bayarea.council.org. You can find it on the website. And the benefit is if you participate in that survey, you get to see the results. And if you don't, you may not. So there's a real incentive to participate. Daniel Mason writes, about the validity of the poll. If we're talking to 1,000 people, is that really enough to make any meaningful conclusions? Sort of, polling is a interesting science. Can you speak a little bit to that and the margin of error and otherwise?
Sure. So the overall margin of error for a sample size of 1,000 is plus or minus 3.1 percentage points. So, implying a pretty good accuracy level for these overall data. Then, of course, the margin of error is bigger when you're looking at subgroups within the overall sample. So we always want to keep that in mind. I think one thing that speaks to the validity of these results is the consistency that we've seen over time on some questions. And then when we see changes, they make absolute sense in light of the environment. So that, along with the consistency with what we're seeing in other polling, not just our own, but other people's polling, gives me a lot of confidence in the validity of the results.
Thanks, Jessica. There is a point made here by Andrew Carpenter, which I guess it's both a question and a point of view, which is that with BART itself and public transit, it's, is it safety that is preventing people from wanting to go back to public transit, or is it something else? And how could the agencies deal with that? And could you respond to that, Jessica?
Sure. I think we could infer from these data that safety is playing a big part in people's, shying away from public transit. We've, certainly seen in this research and elsewhere that a lot of people don't think it's safe to be on public transit right now. We've had, more than a year of most of us staying away from other people, and the thought of being on public transit puts us in close proximity potentially to other people. Now, whether that's based on science or not, I can't say, but I think that is probably making a pretty big impact on whether people anticipate using transit. And then another factor that we see in these results is that, people might say, well, I'm not going to be going into the office as much, so maybe I can just take my car when I go in or something. It's hard to say. We didn't ask that specifically, but there could certainly be a lot of factors at play there.
Right. Two things I would just mention that I've read about or seen in terms of COVID-19 that may be preventing people from going back onto public transit. It seems that we're past the point where some magic message will convince folks to get back on to transit. They're really just waiting for herd immunity, which may get here sooner than we previously expected. The other thing is that when people see the maw of traffic in their car, they may decide that public transit is a much better option again for them. And so that may drive more transit. Okay, so this is from Rebel Kelkyle, I think. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. Who writes, I know the survey was conducted about the Bay Area. Have you noticed any significant data about people leaving San Francisco and which counties besides the East Bay and South Bay they may be going? Have you seen anything about that, Jessica?
I've seen a couple, articles in the media about how people are moving out of or at least during the pandemic months, the winter and fall, and even earlier, people were moving out of the cities and into, the East Bay and other places. But I don't personally have any data on it, so can't speak from that perspective.
Bob Brown writes, this may be a tongue-in-cheek question. Be interesting to see if the opinion of people about which state is better to live in, California versus Texas, have ever actually lived in Texas. So do we have a crosstab of if they've actually lived in Texas or not?
No, we don't. We kind of threw that in there as kind of a fun question, knowing there would be questions coming out of that one, but no, we don't know if they have ever lived in Texas.
And then Jessica, there's a question here about sub-regional differences that emerged here. So were there particular things that caught your attention about how Santa Clara is feeling, or the North Bay, or San Francisco, that seemed really quite different than the other parts of the Bay Area, that really stood out to you, or maybe Maori also, but anything that jumps for you on that?
We can definitely take a look and see if there's something that stands out. We did look at, a number of different questions that not all of them were, fit into this presentation today. Things like how people are feeling about the COVID-19 vaccines and things like that. We saw a little bit of differences depending on geography when it came to vaccine hesitancy, but nothing dramatic. So I'm, remembering that from looking at those crosstabs. I think what's even more noteworthy might be the consistency that we see from county to county in the Bay Area. Certainly, each county is unique and different in quite a few ways, but then there are a lot of commonalities. So I know that's a very general response, but maybe Mallory can point to something if anything stands out, but she might need a minute or two to take a look.
I'll need a minute or two, and my internet is unstable, so I will get looking at that and let you know.
Okay, thanks, Mallory. So Pete Hillen asked about homelessness, and how did we define that? If there was a definition on what is homelessness, as people are answering this question.
So the question that we asked that was open-ended, what is the most important problem facing the area? We, got a number of different responses. People could write in whatever they wanted with an open-ended question like that, and then we can take anything that seemed like it was about homelessness and categorize it as homelessness. So, we didn't have a response option on the open-ended question. And then when it came to the, the list of concerns, how concerned are you about each of these? The wording was simply homelessness.
Okay, thanks. This is more of a point of view than a question, but this is Gerald Couthen. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. He says, given the fact that a fairly high percent expect to work at home at least part of the time, and the failure of public transit to bounce back, at least so far, does it make any sense to keep studying the Second Bay rail tube destined to cost upwards of $30 billion? So that's not necessarily a polling question. I think at the Bay Area Council, our point of view would be that studying it doesn't cost $30 billion. It costs significantly less, and it is something we should still prepare for. We can make the policy decision about that larger expenditure when the time is right on that. Let's see. So then Diane Shaw, what percent of the respondents had jobs before the pandemic started? And is the percent of those returning to work only those that were working? It's kind of a technical question. Does that come through? Like, did we tweak our responses based on who had jobs before or were unemployed, made unemployed by the pandemic?
No, we looked for demographic representativeness. So, we can infer when it comes to registered voters that the portion that reported, that they're working or not working in the survey is roughly similar to that of the voter population overall.
Okay, great. All right. There were a couple other questions. Just real quick. Have you surveyed the Link 21 project? So this is the big 21 counties mega region effort that Bay Area Council is very supportive of. And we did not poll that. I think it may have been polled, but we did not poll that ourselves, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then do we have any healthcare access or equity related data in this poll?
I wouldn't say healthcare access or equity related questions. Certainly we asked opinions about, likelihood to get the COVID-19 vaccine or having received it, which we could look at from an equity lens. We didn't include those slides today, but I would say overall, no, I don't think we have much to share when it comes to healthcare equity.
Okay. And then Molly Graham writes, is the return to transit survey focused on the general public or employers or both? Well, it's both. So the Bay Area Council is surveying companies and EMC is doing research on the general public. That's our partnership on that work, is to cover both sides of that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Okay, we're gonna close it up. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Mallory, very, very much. For those that are curious, there's been a number of questions or comments about will we share the PowerPoint or share these results? And so yes, we will be posting these on the Bay Area Council's website. I'm not sure, it'll either be late this afternoon or tomorrow that we'll be sharing it. And please dig into it and be enlightened. It's really incredible research that you did, Jessica. Thank you very, very much. Mallory, thank you very, very much. And also thank you to Rufus and Justin who organized this webinar and to everyone that participated. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.